Well, very good. Well, let's go ahead and start then talking about the homepage for Venya. And again, kind of taking Art's lead here, we wanted to talk a little bit more about the page here that we see in the design documentations on DevDocs. And so, as you remember in the demo itself, Art did a great job going through the shop by category experience. That looked great. So at some point we'll get the PR and merge that. But we do have some content areas like the sales banner, the new arrivals carousel, and a few other items that are essentially CMS block components and sliders that I think are worth spelling out. And so Art and I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier this week, and I told him that that's something we should definitely talk about today and use a scenario-based approach to describe them. So if everybody's okay with that, we can I'd like to spell those out as stories, and we'll just build that off of the epic we've got here for number 98, which is homepage for Venya. Great. So let's take a look at all the issues that come off of this. And so I think one of the easiest ways for us to shortcut this, unless GitHub has made some changes overnight, to clone things, is take in the example that we used for shop by category, and essentially do our kind of our own pseudo clone of this. And so what I'm going to do is create a new issue based on that.
Yeah, I'm curious actually. Anyone, Eugene or you gentlemen from ComRap, do you have GitHub issue clone tools that you use? No?
You don't use it too.
No, just copy paste. Gotcha.
Yeah, I saw one add-on for Chrome that looked promising, but it also seemed to have some interesting side effects to it as well. So I didn't want to jump in. It didn't look like it was coming from Google or a reputable source. So I'm certain I would love to find one that would save a lot of time on our end.
Especially if you could link back.
Exactly. Cool. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So we're going to basically take the idea of the implement shop by category component in Venya, and so we're going to take the same mentality here, which is the implement page component for. All right, what do you think on this one? So if you look at what we've got here, so I think we're really looking at page level component for something like this, correct? Is that what is that kind of what you're thinking? The sales banner?
Yep, I will interrupt you a little bit. I would say, according to design for homepage, we have there for now 5 and still not clarified 4 main components.
Mm-hmm.
CMS page, CMS block, and 2 sliders.
Yep.
Depends on actually our idea. It can be 2 different sliders or even 1 different slider. So we will continue with this question. But for now, let's create CMS page component.
Got it.
And that would be a root component specifically. Are you familiar with the root components concept from documentation?
Plus minus, yeah, sure, it should be root component.
Yeah, yeah. There's going to be some expansion to the concept of root components in addition of other types of components which have binding.
Yep.
So just kind of writing this out based on the scenario-based approach that we're taking. So in this one, we'll just say, as a developer, I want to create a CMS page component for Venya, so that I want to relate this to some of the things that we're doing on the sales banners and such. So sales banner, not recommended, so it's sales banners, and so that I can.
Actually, no matter any content, we will take from CMS page. Done.
Okay, it could be, yeah. So basically retrieve content from them. So it's basics, probably that. So we keep it at it's a very kind of broad level. And that could be any type of content, right?
To retrieve content. So that retrieve.
Oh, so that I can, sorry. For Venya, so that I can. Yep, I want to, so that, cool. And I think what I'd like to do, at least because that content can be any piece of it, if we can at least put a shopper-friendly aspect of this, I think for me that would include examples could include sales, promos, and other content inside of that. So assumptions, I think, are pretty fair. It's a successful setup and completion of Venya examples, sample data. That makes sense. I know we're tracking that on another story. And as far as the acceptance criteria, so I think basically it's a rework of this display CMS page component aligned with Venya design and prototype. Let's see here. I think we're going to keep it really simple, just testing and documentation. Right? We're creating something that's basically a CMS level component. We're going to test and document it. So it's pretty basic, but I think based on the idea of creating a component that is based on data that's inside of Magento, and then we're going to expose that in a meaningful way, that's the beginning of something. And I think we want to look at some examples of what that content could be. I think we've got some good ones from Samya there that we've kind of added, but I think that's a start. Art, is this kind of what you were thinking in terms of the level of detail? It's pretty high level, but I don't want to overstep.
Yeah, sure, exactly. But one more question, just to clarify. Our definition of done for some tickets, for some tasks, can be situations that GraphQL is not ready. So our definition on done will be user sample data. Not from Magento backend, like from some JSON file in this component, or we have to wait till GraphQL will be ready. It's a main question.
May I suggest that, well, I don't want to make this harder than it has to be. We already have precedent for using mock data that's saved in a file in the repository along with the implementations. And if you want to do that, do that. I would say as a stretch goal, once you're finished with implementation, you could try adding perhaps a link to the GraphQL client that gets created in Peregrine. And then we could mock our data out using a small abstraction that allows us to write components against the same interface as the remote API. This is an opportunity to try that if you have the time. But I'd call that I wouldn't even list it in the story. It's just that this is one of those, this is a case where you might have an opportunity to try that.
Okay, awesome. How about to do it next way? Sample data in a JSON file in this component. And then when GraphQL will be ready, we will just switch get the data from GraphQL. That's it. In this case, we can be much faster to closing the tasks.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's just in the future, it might be an accelerator because there's a burden on a developer who doesn't know what our standard is for doing mock data. And if it's clear where to put mock data, then it's easier and faster for them in the future.
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
Again, just a stretch.
No, I think it's a good point, right? I think in the philosophy of kind of starting small but then evolving that, GraphQL will always be a dependency we'll have to track carefully, but I think maybe we can use this as an opportunity to understand, how we get more consistent with that mock data and kind of learn from what we've got. So let's see what we've got, and then we can evaluate it and then and iterate as needed. So cool.
Yep. Sure.
Art, anything else from your perspective for this one? Do you think this is enough to get started?
More than enough. It's okay. Awesome.
Okay. Very good. And in terms of an estimate, Art, how would you assign this in terms of kind of work days and such? What would you give this one?
Oh, it's kind of simple. Okay, we have 3. Let's mark it as 3 days.
3. Okay. Very good. And I've got it assigned to the epic here, so it's part of the homepage. As far as the labels itself, just a quick reminder. So this is going to touch the venue concept right there, and it's in the backlog. And Art, I'm assuming you're signing up for this one.
Yep, do it.
Good. Just making assumptions here and making sure. And that's it. So let's go ahead and submit this one. There we go. This, of course, would be a great place for a cloning button, but we won't digress. So let's take a look at the block component here. And again, what I want to do is take the example that we had here, but also attach it to some real scenarios that we have in the designs. Again, even if we put those as footnotes, that helps us evaluate things in terms of a demo on what to expect, even regardless of the data source. And so on this one, CMS block component for Venya. So very similar to that, create a CMS block component for Venya so it can retrieve. So in terms of the examples themselves, can we attach that to something that is it's in the visuals here?
Can I hit pick?
Please.
Sorry. Yep, I would say it's whole banners and footer content according to this design. Yep.
Got it. And thinking this one, if we do intend this to include footer content, unless it's the footer itself, we'll just need to be cognizant of what's already created. I know Jimmy has some examples already for that one. So I think just being cognizant of that, I think we did a pretty good job with that with the recent demo, but just to avoid duplication of effort, that would be good. James, I know you had some feedback on the word retrieve. What were you thinking on that?
Retrieve implies that the core sort of story criterion is to use live data, which we're not doing.
Yeah.
I would say so that as a developer, I want to create a CMS block component for Venya so that I can display content.
I like that better.
So that I can display rich content.
Yep.
There's another bit to this, and I think we talked about this last time. You used GraphQL in your last implementation.
Yep.
This time there isn't sufficient GraphQL coverage, but you could use REST APIs if you wanted to, right?
Do we need it actually? As I understand, we will do this only with GraphQL.
Ultimately, we want everything to be GraphQL, but we have set a precedent that we're going to use REST APIs where GraphQL is not available. However, that precedent so far only holds for commerce, cart, and checkout, which this is not that. So yeah, I mean, maybe don't use REST APIs, but the assumptions have to be, I think, that the mock data is successfully displayed, and what are the other features that a CMS block component would have? I think for me, the main feature is that it would have the ability to display content that was arbitrary HTML, but that lived inside the React render tree.
Yep.
And do you feel confident that you can approach that task?
Yep, why not, even with, yep, let's do it with API. Not a problem.
So like,
I would say in addition to features for this CMS block component, I would say we need in addition titles there and possibility to call with ID or identifier and yep, only.
All right, is that something we want to spell out in here? I'm just trying to follow this, sorry.
It's like we're anticipating what the API surface is going to be. So yeah, do you want to try and make a two-component architecture with one that does a fetch of the CMS content and then an inner component that renders it? Or are you expecting, you said that you would like to be able to just simply argue a CMS block ID or a CMS record ID.
Yep. That's his idea, to use a CMS block ID. Okay, we have CMS block ID and we have CMS block identifier. I would say let's use identifier, but we can enhance it to ID.
And this requires then that the administrator create a block with a specific identifier in order to populate that area of the page.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay.
So,
I think with those assumptions, is there anything we'd like to capture here? Because it seemed fairly specific, I know.
well, first of all, I think we have to, I don't want to expand scope on the story, but I think we have to think about what the merchant's sort of persona is gaining from there being a CMS block, not just the developer. Because, a developer doesn't have any reason just by ourselves to make something that renders rich content, but we want the rich content that the merchant or content author creates to appear in our progressive web app.
Yep.
A component is the way to get there, but there's an unanswered question.
Yeah.
Art is answering it very simply, that we would have a hard-coded place where CMS content goes.
Right.
And the places would be named after areas in the theme, which is very similar to layout update handles.
So may I frame it this way then? I think so. One of the things I think when we talked about last week's grooming session is, I think it's most useful when we look at this at the task level. And essentially we're looking at, so what we're doing here is very close to what that task level would be. In the instance of GitHub, there's no way to assign a task. It's basically just a small story, probably 3 points, 3 points or smaller. And so for the purposes of this, would it feel better for us to create another story after this that this links into, that is an epic or something similar, that has that shopper experience, that then this would just hang off of essentially as a task? So is that helpful? To me, it feels more helpful in that, but I don't want to make sure we're not short-sighted.
So a little bit, but if we break off that task, then what remains is the presentational element of it, which assumes that it has already received the data in an appropriate state and that the data is relevant.
Okay.
When it comes to just rendering rich HTML, we know we're going to have to do it using the sort of dirty back, channel of calling the secret API in React that lets you do it. Well, it's not secret. It's just, they discourage you from doing it.
Yep.
We already have done that in a rich text component. So if we split the story up into like how to contextualize a CMS page and how to implement the CMS page, the implementation story becomes tiny, because it's just an instance of one of those already built components.
Okay.
So yeah, we should talk about, I'm sorry, it just comes over me. So yeah, we should talk about what the merchant scenario is. Like the merchant do we want to talk about the merchant publishes a piece of content based on a name that the merchant knows? They have to create something with this name.
Right.
And then it appears. That translated technically, the implication would be that inside the implementation, you have to look and see if a block exists by that name, and if not, fail silently or gracefully.
Okay.
God.
So it publishes and then appears. And so when it gets boiled down to a task like this, how would we finish this one out and then come back to that one?
Okay, so I'd say create mock data.
Yep.
Okay. Create API for CMS block to hard code. Okay, create a.
And this is part of this story or something? Okay. All right.
These are tasks in this story. Is create a React component which accepts a globally unique CMS ID as a prop.
Okay.
And that component should retrieve and render the contents. And we can say retrieve there because that's in the AC. That's all right if we say something that can't get done. Retrieve and render the contents. And a sort of a QA aspect of this and a security aspect of this is do it well and properly. Because when you get raw, rich text like that, it's usually very badly formatted. It's dangerous to inject. It might have scripts. So
Okay.
I think we need to think about sanitization. That might not be in scope of this story, but it's worth thinking about while you're doing this story.
So I'll put that in as an assumption. So I think but if we break that assumption, I don't think that's a fail of the acceptance criteria. I think it's just I think we just build from what we've learned there.
That's accurate.
Okay. I think this seems good. I think what I'd like to do, and maybe not necessarily in this form, but I think what I'd like to do is to take another look at the Epic from a merchant perspective. I do see these linked, and I think I've got enough to at least spell that out a little bit so that these kind of these are bridged better, so that at least Art knows what he needs to do, but also as part of the larger story of the merchant, which is more of that scenario-based approach.
Yeah.
Cool. So, guys, any other questions? Art, does this make sense to you? I know we added a few things there, but does this make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And then, so in terms of, again, without timelines and such, in terms of estimates, what would you give this one?
Oh, rest and I would say 8.
8. So
Okay.
All right. And then, got it. These 3, homepage again, we'll modify the Epic, and I think that'll be good. All right, cool. We'll submit that one. Excellent. Perfect. All right. So we had 2 other things on the homepage we can certainly cover quickly. What I also want to do is just to make sure that we've got Alex on here as well. Alex, I know I want to make the most use of your time. I know you're working on the bulk API work as well. Is there any? So we can continue this direction of the content items here for Art, which is fine. But in respect for your time, is there anything around the web API that you think would be good that we define so that you can get started as well?
Generally, it's hard to say. I mean, that's a bit mix of the 2 projects when we have the GraphQL and we have the PWA. In any case, we already working on. So we have the pull request, for example, for the configuration issues that is raised up.
Yes.
Which we already can use. There are 2 pull requests which are for blogs and CMS pages which was not merged yet.
Yep.
That's something I can check on because there's also some tester failed, and generally more take this administrative function for the speed up the process for the components of the GraphQL which we need for our development.
Yeah, I mean, GraphQL is one of those technologies that it's very easy to make up unnecessary solutions because it's a flexible language, it's a flexible specification. A lot of the things that you think you need to create, you don't. We're just using Apollo right now, which is so very featureful that we recommend getting familiar with it if you're not already. Are you also participating in the GraphQL Teams backlog?
Yep.
Yep, gotcha. Are you like 50% dedicated to them and 50% to us, or do you spend more time with which team?
I'm spending time with all teams, I guess, which are available there.
That's what it seems like. No, that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I mean, I think for the purpose of this, we just want to make. I think you sit in a very unique position with even this product's dependencies to help us carry this further. Again, but anything we can do to at least build and help your understanding of this, and maybe it's just continuation of these components. But I wanted to take a pause to make sure are there any examples or demos or proofs of concepts based on your learnings there that could help us advance this. And I think the short answer is probably not yet. But I did want to talk a little bit about that first, so that we could get that covered.
Very good.
Cool.
Yeah. As I said, I mean, I will try to create this bridge between the PWA and requirements which we need from GraphQL teams for the features. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you could iterate on. Yeah, if you could work on getting those business objects available by making the right requests to them.
Yeah,
Because
correct.
lately, in the core team, we've been asking them weird questions like, how do you expose design overrides or a tree of page builder content? And, those are design level questions. This is just coverage.
Right.
And so you know, thank you for doing the kind of boring work of just extending the coverage. That's
also part of, I mean, I also make it some fun out of it. That's not a problem.
No, that's what it seems like. No, I often talk to this team a lot. I think the success for this project and really all of Magento has a lot to do with the coverage that we make there, right? Because that really unleashes the possibilities, and so we appreciate it. So I'm glad you're having fun with it as well. So, well, good. Well, so with the spirit of this, I think again, looking at the attendees that we've got here, I think the best thing we can do is probably knock out these last two stories here on both product slider and gallery. I think we've got a lot of content to work from there, and then we can call it an afternoon. So. Let's take a look at our template that we've created here. Oh, sorry guys.
There you go. That's why I got that camera on. Make sure that I make faces. Very important.
Yes.
What is going on here?
And I watched the demo again earlier this week. I need to work on my resting face.
Yeah,
I do.
I need to work on my GraphQL face.
All right, so guys, let's take a look at the product slider then.
Product slider involves a number of existing concepts, so you should be able to reuse things that you've done. I would say definitely.
I think so. So if we take a look at what we've got here, so when we talk about sliders, we've got a couple different related items. When I think about sliders, I think about this carousel here, but I do know, again, how Art described it, there's almost a superset of the sliders that do and don't, include this. Is this a carousel or is a slider? Does it include this, that, or the other, right? And so, to me, I think the simplest form is something like this from that one. So I think
the cover flow style.
Yeah. So
who doesn't love a good cover flow?
So I think for this one, so let's take a look at where we left off with the last story. Again, that's it's a Venya feature suggestion. And so for this one, again, let's take the spirit of this being more of a task than a story, just because I think that's most helpful for this forum. We'll attach this to more of the scenario than with the epic. So when we think about Art working on this, as a developer, I want to create a.
Yep, according to this slider, yep, exactly product slider. So as a developer, I wanted to create, component for root component for Venya. As title says, new arrivals means it's a new one. In Magento backend, we have a check mark set this product as a new, so we can use this, or we can collect whole products, some amount of, or whole products from some category. Can be also useful for this component.
Well, I think we would assume that a business user would want to be in control of the query to some degree.
Yep.
So new arrivals is easy. If it's a widget and it has configuration, I would imagine that it only has 2 non-visual configurations, which is, fetch first, or, let's see. Okay, so we've got a carousel that displays images from any place in the catalog, or this being a product widget, it would always be displaying just the images for one product, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Either way.
It's just confusing to me because new arrivals.
Oh, yeah, so I'm tagging it to this.
Okay,
Sorry,
so this is a multi-product slider. This isn't the images for single product.
So,
because that says flower fields maxi dress. What I want to know from you, Sonia, is that when you navigate to the right and the cover flows over, is this the same product and a different picture, or is it a new product?
It's a different product.
Okay, so this is actually rotating through products.
Yeah.
So that means...
And it may not be limited to a single category. It could span multiple categories. I would imagine it's something like things that were added in the last 48 or 72 hours would be quote unquote new, right?
Or do you know offhand what the filter library in the current schema is capable of with regards to the age of creation of the resource? I feel like it's in there.
I will check. check actually.
Yeah, they had to write out a set of tools that are the only thing you can use to talk to GraphQL. Want to it, and it's all written out in this, in the domain-specific GraphQL language. Yep. So, like right now, there's no look up a single product interface. So, if I want to look up a product, what I do is I filter the entire product collection on the URL, and then I take the only result. And that's just a limitation. And
theoretically, outside of Venya, this same carousel could be used for all one category.
Well, that's the thing is.
Sale.
It's stupid that I have to do that, but it also gives you a hint as to the power. If you look at the GraphQL schema, and I can't think of a great place for you guys to do that. I think there's a published version of DevDocs. You'll find that there's this concept of a filter input type that can run a number of different operators, like equals, doesn't equal, greater than, less than, contains, and can run them on the entire catalog of products. So like these could all basically be the same query, just a products query that passes back enough to populate a tile. And it's the variables that get sent in that determine what kind of thing it is, which is great. It pushes that logic to the very edges. What I'm concerned about is whether or not it's still an input type, or whether or not it's still not an input type and it's just like one variable that you get to change, or whether it's not. And I have not looked at the schema in a while, but I seem to remember the last time I did, there was an improvement.
So maybe unless we know, if we don't know offhand, I think in the acceptance criteria, we can just consider a review of that. So it's part of understanding what it is, and then is that helpful or?
Right. I'm just saying there's some discovery to be done, and a task in there is like, discover whether current state's catalog GraphQL is capable of filtering products to satisfy new arrivals scenario. It says new arrivals, so we'll take it. We'll say, as a shopper, I want to see the newest things in the store in an attractively displayed way. As a merchant, I want to quickly showcase the things that are new in store by placing a component that can be configured to filter on anything, to place it on the homepage and to title it new arrivals.
Okay.
And and as a developer, I guess I want to fetch products by criteria. So the underlying thing, fetching products by criteria, is satisfied by the GraphQL service, but there's some discovery to be done about whether it satisfies all of the use cases.
Got it. So I would say for the purposes of this one, I think let's relax the specifics on exactly what comes back to this, but also acknowledge that there was some review and discovery. I mean, ideally we create multiple spikes. Those spikes would yield a summary.
And also, even though the Venya example says new arrivals, it doesn't have to be prescriptive on that level. It just needs to, based on whatever filters the merchant applies, display a carousel of products on whichever page. So it just so happens that in this example, particularly, it's new arrivals. But it need not be. I mean, it would be better for it to be more open than that, right?
Yep. All right. How about this? So I think the purpose of this, we want to, as a developer, I want to create a product slider component for Venya so that I can display rich content by criteria from the Magento CMS. So it just has the ability to do, the criteria that it is capable of. And so I think as part of that, as an example, includes the new arrivals carousel, may or may not, but that is that's the idea.
It's right in here. I have GraphQL connected to my instance, so you can pull up the viewer and actually look at the schema. We got a documentation explorer here.
Cool.
And when you pull out the docs, it doesn't work because something's wrong.
No worries. So so I think with the assumptions, we can assume, successful setup and completion. Sample data, similar to what we talked about, the role format, sure, we've got that. But then acceptance criteria is a summary of the GraphQL coverage. Basically say we were going to display as far as what we know, and then as part of that would be, this is actually might be where Alex comes in, would be, I don't call it creation of GraphQL tickets, but share, basically identification of needs to share with GraphQL. So if it doesn't cover all of our needs, we'll come up with recommendations that do.
Yeah, I mean, again, we get to pick the scenario as long as we satisfy it. So, like you said, we can just pick what filter criteria are there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, obviously with some of the early designs, we're going to went in with some assumptions, but if we go in with, you know, with the beginnings of that, I think that makes sense for a sample and reference theme, but I think we also want to identify the case of where it's not, so that'll make extensibility and other things easier. So cool. Mock data. So you guys help me out a little bit on the acceptance criteria for this. And so part of it is what's covered, what's not, but then in terms of the actual work product on this one, do we still see the same ideas where you're still creating mock data, creating components? Well, it doesn't feel as correct.
Well, what I assume that Art you want to do is start by creating the visual component, and then later when the component is done using simple mock data or hard-coded values, then you attend to hooking it up to data, and then you might have to make some small, you know, changes to the expected view model, but you know, it sounds from the type of work that you typically do that would be the way that you do it. Am I wrong?
Yep, exactly. Only like this we can have something to show, to present, and then make it working with the GraphQL.
Yes.
One more. If we will add here a lot of logic, like I wanna have in this component whole products by ID. I will add the ID when I will put this component in a template. Or I want to have the products from categories or from something else. In this case, you can suggest, or we can decide, do we need second component? If we will make big gallery slider component inside and add the logically any type of view, any type of settings, any whole bunch of properties, we actually no need second or even any other kind of gallery visual components. We can use only one with a lot of settings, or we will create two or, for example, three according to design. Simple, easy. For example, new arrivals can use only IDs, category, I mean product IDs. I can manually add there. Or please show me all products from category. Done. Second component, okay, it's recommended for you. Again, some products by ID or from category, again, done, only like this. We have to decide.
I'm concerned about overloading one component with functionality because it implies that there's runtime configuration. Like, I'm assuming that you have one gallery component, and the way that you make it choose what its internal template would be is that you argue in a React component constructor as a prop, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of branch logic in there that I think you don't need to do at runtime. Because you have these components that can be hard-coded because they know, because it's a strongly typed system, that the contract they're receiving is product. And I can't think of anything that you apply that carousel look and feel to than products. So it sounds to me like you might be doing something that I do all the time, every day, which is make things too generic too quickly, is what it sounds like to me. So I'm not dissuading you from doing it, but it's not, I mean, we already have some stuff in Peregrine which suffers from this. So it's not necessary for you to take every implementation you make and try to make it, you know, totally modular right now. Did that make any sense? I mean, we are building Vue and then instrumenting it as much as possible with the time we have left. Is that ringing a bell for anyone? This is like, and by Vue I mean V-I-E-W, not V-U-E. We're implementing views, and you are writing a React component, and when it's done, then we can talk in another channel. We have several different channels we could speak through about different stretch goals, attaching it to live data, coming up with a generic pattern for it so that its code can be reused, but not suffer from, performance loss or from over generic looking code. When I unwrap a component like 60 times and I find out that there's a list whose only job is to do iteration, I get mad. I'm like, why do we need this thing called a list when we already have the construct in the language? So it's, I do it, we do it. But yeah, I mean, just write write a new arrivals component, start there.
Yep, that makes sense.
Expand and genericize outward, yeah. It's what Andrew would want.
All right. So let's,
it's the legit.
Yeah, so I think I think with that in mind, if we really simplify this based on a very simple use case, I think we started off with creating a summary of the coverage, understanding that it's creating that simple component. Do we want to do anything in the mock data, or do we just go straight to kind of testing and documentation? This is what I understand. Here's the example: test and document, done.
Yeah.
I know this is very high level, but at least the spirit of this. Otherwise, we can cover in other channels.
Well, yeah, on GitHub. Just taking a look, it doesn't appear as though your pull request. Well, where is it? Oh no, where is it? Do we merge it?
Oh, for homepage?
Yeah.
I don't know if the.
No. I did not make a pull request yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It depends on what you're using. But if you are writing storybooks, then that's great. That would be above and beyond our expectations. Are you writing storybooks for the components that you create?
Oh, not yet, but okay, I will.
Yeah, well, it's pretty time consuming to do one, but it sounds like you're familiar with storybooks, that's the great news. Have you written them before?
Not yet, I would say. Say not yet.
It's pretty cool. I think you will notice that it feels like you're duplicating test logic, but I would caution you from trying to import the same logic into both the test and the storybook because they operate in different environments. But yeah, if you make a storybook, then that effectively serves as both testing and documentation because another developer pulls up that storybook and sees every conceivable state of the component in isolation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, obviously.
Yeah. So I think part of the prerequisite is just kind of learning up on that, which I think makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of goodness with what we've done so far. So for any new work in that, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, cool.
So in its broadest sense, maybe I'll ask the question a little bit differently. Is this enough to at least get started on the basics of a slider component? Do we think this is enough to get started, or do we want to add a little bit more detail?
I think for AC, we need to include and mention that please don't take this the wrong way if this is totally unnecessary for me to say, but as contributors grow and we get more junior people, we might have to remind people that it should work on mobile. So maybe don't have hover state. So it should be mobile first, and it should be performant, and it should not scroll in a jerky way.
You mean this is not going to work?
Yeah. But one day, man, one day.
Actually, that would be a nightmare.
It probably does work if you just turn up the electricity really, really high.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
how about this? I think what we can do is maybe a footnote for Sami on this one. I think we should and we've talked about this internally, but formalize a documentation task for that we can work on with Calcaben on essentially our design principles, like basically a list of assumptions that we could use as boilerplate to link to for every one of these. Is like with a design, we believe that it does this, 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 and this, because I know we have it and we've talked about it, but just making something like that as something we fall back on in terms of, expectations or browser requirements. There's a lot of things like that that are probably worthwhile.
I mean, that would be definitely acceptance criteria related, right? And we can make that global for sure and put it on, publish it on the site. Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good idea.
For sure.
Cool. Excellent. Good stuff.
For sure, he says. Well,
all right.
Okay, so that thing is Grooming. Hello. How are you doing, Anton?
Hello.
We just finished grooming a story.
Well,
The story is ready now to be done. It's product slide.
as always, try.
Yes.
Good.
And the grooming.
Hey, look, you're
Cool.
making me look good.
So why don't we do this?
I
I
have
think
room for a couple more stories, don't you think?
we do. I think I'd like to finish strong. So we just did the product slider, but I think we've got this idea of a product gallery, which is quite similar. So for the purposes of kind of doing two things with one, let's finish off this in terms of what we perceive as an estimate. We'll copy that and then at least get us started on the product gallery, which I know that Art and I had talked about earlier. So Art, on this one, so based on where we just left off, what would you consider as an estimate for this?
Okay.
It feels big. Feels big.
Yep, let's add 8.
Okay.
And one more for clarification, this see all new arrivals. It looks like we have to, for example, for now, leave it as a blank, empty button, just add styles there. In the future, looks like we have to create some URL with some page for these products where we have a list of them.
We can leave the button out completely and just link the product to the PD page if that makes things easier.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense to get started.
Because, I mean, I understand what you're saying. That catalog filter, the page with those results should pre-exist for it to link to. We can worry about that later. That's not a must-have.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think given the size of the story, I think Art, maybe you and I offline can kind of break this out in a little bit smaller stories. I do like to get things down to the 1 to 3 level for this one. So maybe we can break those down as almost tasks per se. But I mean, this is a lot right now. I think that's good. But I think if we can break that down, I think that would be super helpful too.
Eric, question for you on that. Do you want me to update the markup to remove that button so there's just no confusion on what it is we're implementing for now? It's an easy change.
I would not, but if in the documentation, we have to find a way to classify things as essentially stretch goals or optional, because I like to come back around to it. But I think we need to find a way to clearly denote things that are essentially iterations within that. And I've got an idea, but I want to talk about it a little bit.
I want to hear your idea.
Cool. Excellent. All right. 8 milestone epics. This is part of homepage. And let's get one more of these. All right.
Awesome.
All right. Implement product component for video. All right. Again, without a clone button, we've cloned. So let's talk about a little bit of this. And I think this discussion may cover the next few minutes of this. But I know that when we think about galleries and when we think about sliders, they're related, right? Mm-hmm. But so when we think about galleries, what I think about galleries, I'm thinking about where is it right here? Sorry, this guy right here. So I'm thinking about the recommended for you example. So I think that, again, just to get crisp on our terminology here. And so when I think about this as a shopper scenario, what we'd like to do is essentially map this to at least best effort on recommended for you.
We have two vocabulary domains to nail down, and one of them is the types of cross sells that we're going to talk about, even though in terms of our own implementation, we don't care because we're querying the API for that information.
Yep.
And it has nothing to do with our own implementation of it. I mean, barring the idea that one or more might be personalized and so needs to render on a different pipeline, but that's it. The other thing is we need to keep reminding ourselves the difference between a slider, carousel, gallery, zoetrope, album,
Jumbotron, Megatrons, all those good things. Yes. So, yep. So I think for the purposes of this one, again, if we really think about this, and I think I'm embodying the spirit of these being more tasks, I think I feel like we can relax the nomenclature, but I think as a follow-up, much like kind of the design standards and principles of pretty much everything we do here, whether it be mobile first and others, let's look at that as kind of referenceable, almost auxiliary documentation so that we're crisp. We're crisp with ourselves externally, but internally, I think we can be a little bit more flexible in what that is, just in the spirit of tasks, and instead of kind of But I think I do agree that's something we need to track down. So with the product gallery component, again, if we look at this as an example recommended for you, Carousel, I think there's a lot that we can borrow from the slider story. So if you look at this being a product gallery component that again is attached to a shopper story for the new homepage experience, it's about displaying rich content by criteria from the CMS, and so we're going to do our very best to get as far as we can with the coverage. I think part of this story itself is going to include the summary of coverage and understanding what's there and what isn't. So there's a bit of discovery there, but then also creating that component of the product gallery based on the design work that Salmi and team have done. Again, it's pretty high level. It's going to be a fairly larger one, and I do want to break this up afterwards in a similar way that what we're going to do for the slider in kind of 1 to 3 point stories.
Okay.
That all said, what else would we like to add here specifically around the gallery that would be helpful here in the next few minutes?
Well, I think media in general is a pretty deep topic, and we should make sure not to try and cover every possibility. If you look in the API, media objects can have lots of unusual properties. They can be images, they can be videos, they can need to be resized, and we should make sure that we only implement the so-called happy path. So it's important to say what the minimum acceptable behavior of a product gallery is versus a product slider or product carousel. To me, the minimum acceptable behavior of the gallery that was shown is that it's possible to change to swap the featured photo with the other photos arbitrarily.
No, it doesn't swap. So this is what I had discussed with Jimmy. So what it is the concept is that if a merchant wants to promote certain products more than others because either sales are lagging or it's a newer item that they want to push sales for, that would have a greater amount of real estate in that gallery. But they are all independently clickable items. So the bottom portion of it can be swiped or it can be rotated, but it does not change the focus image.
Okay.
So they're kind of independent of one another, even though they're placed. So the top one would just be a static image container that pulls maybe products that are tagged with a certain attribute in the back end.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the carousel portion would really be just the thumbnails alone. That's what that is.
Okay. Okay. So that's so much easier. There's almost no state involved with that. All the state is completely in the drawn.
Independent.
Yeah. Can you make a row of pictures?
That'll be the exception.
Just checking. Yeah. No, we're good. I think we're good. And so thank you. That clarification is very important to us because it helps us to point this.
Yes.
And I think it should be pointed carefully because this is still an area of great deal of interaction. And so it needs to be in the same way that we described the slider. It needs to be accessibility compliant. It needs to be mobile first in its interactions. And it needs not to break the illusion of native. So make sure that where possible, if you are moving DOM elements around, that you're not layout thrashing, that you're not, this is more technical, you're not layout thrashing, you're using hardware acceleration. So for instance, for the, if the scrolling occurs outside of a regular scroll mechanism, you'd want to use a translate rather than setting a positioning property, that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. And so those are not acceptance criteria for the story so much as like those are the details of what we would roll up into AC as accessible and doesn't jank. Exactly. It's not subjective. It's whether or not it's got this particular class of bugs.
Yeah, exactly. I almost see them as two different resources. One is, I think, one is technical, so a set of technical standards, but then also experiential ones, right? Ones that are related to the shopper experience that do things like browser requirements, do things like accessibility, things that would kind of an end user in mind. So yeah, I think that's actually a really good finding from today that we can look at ourselves internally and share with the team at an upcoming sprint. All right, so this is the basics. I think we've revealed a really good correlation or lack of correlation between the primary and secondary image, which is good. We made this a little bit easier. Art, again, I took the basics of what we just covered in the slider and adapted that to gallery for this one. And so for the purposes of kind of finishing this out, did you have any, and did you want to add anything else or any other questions or considerations based on what we talked about earlier this week that we wanted to add to the story?
Till now, everything is okay. Same logic stuff for this button. And one more option, not option, clarification. We still don't have possibility to get review and this black box with the stars from any source, GraphQL or API. So we cannot.
No problem.
Agreed. So that's a good point.
That is known. Fully understand that that's not a possibility. That's again kind of an iterative, like when we're able to do it, we'll do it. But for now, we don't have to worry about it. Also don't have to worry about the button for this one either.
I would assume it would be an extended attribute. And again, if you pull up the schema, you might observe that in the latest alpha, the extended attributes are actually extended directly onto the schema. Like there is a first class property in the product interface called like Aaron recommends or whatever that Luma extension attribute is. So if there's reviews and a Bazaar voice integration that populates in EAV, then you could get at it. But again, we would definitely call that we would call it a sketch. The data is not there. That's the thing. You have to populate it with random numbers. Like, wow, everyone hates this dress.
And really it's more for purposes of demonstrating that that's probably where we would put the ratings for a merchant that has that ability and is customizing a PWA theme for themselves. I mean, it's not prescriptive.
Perfect. That brings great clarity. So any other questions?
Nope.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, that puts us at time. We've knocked out, I think, 4 really, really good stories. And then we've got, I think, some follow-ups in terms of some standards and other things that we want to spell out at kind of a larger level. So that gives us some things to take a look at in parallel. So Art, appreciate your help as always. Yep. We have a question.
I was just wondering, I don't know if we're already doing this, but maybe it would be good to provide a link to the homepage documentation for Venya on the Epic, if that's what it's called.
Yes,
definitely. And also we need to populate it in the wiki. I just was thinking about how much stuff is in Confluence that I still need to go through, that's sort of trailing information and not even knowing how long we're going to pull on that. As an internal thing.
No, that's good. So let's, because a lot of these have just come up with a recent sprint. So we've got new external content that I think is a good point by Samia. We will sweep across these new stories, add them, and I think that'll be hugely valuable, and evaluate the wiki content with Jimothy on how we would expose that with the documentation as needed. So good stuff.
For your information, the wiki is the staging. So reviews necessary.
The wiki is staging to go out to PWA DevDocs?
Yes.
I thought there was a GH Pages branch, not a wiki.
No, what I mean is for the breakdown of components and that review, that happens inside the wiki, and whatever's finalized there is what Kalkaben puts into documentation.
Let's take that offline. Let's take this offline real quick. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Art. Thank you again for hanging in with us, and again, congratulations on all of your great work with the demo. Looking forward to see the PR for that. We're going to take a look at that and bring that in as soon as we can. But if you have any other questions or anything else, don't hesitate to let us know. Have a great weekend because you're ahead of us on that one, and then we'll talk to you soon. Yeah, and Art, anything you need from me directly, you can just feel free to reach out to me on Slack. You know where to find me. Yeah, sure. Yeah, right. Thank you also, guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you. All right, bye-bye. Bye. Ciao.